The Portfolio Composer, Episode 184.
You're listening to the Portfolio Composer podcast with your host and coach Garrett Hope, where he teaches you what it takes to master the business end of writing music through mindset, marketing, and business skills. Make sure to sign up for the newsletter at theportfoliocomposer.com for exclusive offers, business insights, and information not shared on the podcast. And now, for this episode of The Portfolio Composer.
It occurred to me that instead of it being a one-sided thing where composers are always begging performers, why don't we recognize the collaboration that takes place in the creation of any good piece and make it a part of their normal activity so that they recognize that we all play a role in it.
This episode is sponsored by Dorico, the future of scoring. Dorico is the music scoring software of the 21st century, allowing you to write, publish, and play back music notation to the highest professional standards. Created by the world's foremost experts, Dorico marries art, engineering, and AI, resulting in scores of unparalleled balance, warmth, and beauty. Visit dorico.com/TPC to download a fully functioning 30-day trial version of the software. Hello and welcome to this episode of The Portfolio Composer. I am your host, your coach, your teacher, Garrett Hope, and I'm so grateful that you're spending the time listening to this podcast. If you are a creative of any type, then this podcast is for you, and especially if you're a composer, because I'm a composer and I'm doing this podcast to help you and to also learn myself how we can better build our businesses as we continue to venture forward into the 21st century, because the game has changed. The idea of traditional long-term jobs really no longer exists, and we're in a gig-based economy and all these different things that we've spoken about in the podcast. But there's also innovative and cool things happening within more traditional spheres, in particular academia, and that's what this conversation today is going to be about. And I'm very excited to introduce you to today's guest, Eddie Jacobs. Welcome, Eddie.
Thank you, Garrett. It's great to be with you. Thanks so much for having me.
It's really my pleasure. Ed Jacobs' musical life began as a jazz saxophonist. He studied composition at UMass Amherst, University of California, Berkeley, and Columbia University. Eddie's work has been recognized by a Charles Ives Award of the American Academy of Arts and Letters and by appointment as Robert L. Jones Distinguished Professor of Music at East Carolina University. In 2000, he founded the North Carolina NewMusic Initiative, and in 2014, broadened the initiative to include an innovative commissioning program. Well, why don't we just start there? And this is how I got turned on to what you're doing, because a mutual acquaintance of ours, Billy Lackey at the American American Composers Forum, said, Garrett, you need to check out what Eddie's doing. This is really great stuff. And he sent me a link to this video you guys created. Can you just encapsulate what the NewMusic Initiative is and what you hope to achieve?
Sure, I can certainly try to do that. The basic idea with the NewMusic Initiative is that it's fundamentally a concert series that exposes a very traditional academic school of music, exposes all of our students, no matter their discipline, music education, music therapy, performance, composition, musicology, to the work being written today. The commissioning program is an outgrowth of this, and the fundamental germ comes out of student experience typically being one in which a faculty member, an ensemble director, puts a piece of music in front of a student and says, okay, this is what we're going to focus some of our time learning and trying to execute and bring to performance readiness. Now, if we back that process up one step and say to the student, how about if you be a part of creating that piece, not in a compositional sense, but in the sense of the collaborative role a performer plays in generating a new piece of music. So the whole idea was to bring students into the process of commissioning and make learning about commissioning from soup to nuts, everything that's involved in commissioning, to a part of their regular School of Music education, so that when they leave, That is, when they graduate, they enter whatever professional realm they choose to enter. They already know what's involved in commissioning a new piece, whether from a composer's perspective or from a commissioner's perspective. And it's a normal part of a musician's existence. So in sum, the idea is to normalize the commissioning experience for our graduates so that when they're ready, when they graduate, they're ready to commission as part of their career.
I think that's such a great idea. When I was a student, this was not a part of the discussion at all. And it wasn't for any of my peers either. And yet these students that are going to go out into the world and now become the next wave of performers, they're going to be seeking out the composers they know and they meet along the way. And yet now they have a leg up in getting the process started.
That's exactly the idea. In any school of music, department of music, that has a program that encourages composers to write, the natural collaborations that occur are between a young composer and their performer colleagues. Perhaps they're writing for themselves, perhaps they're writing for a student who asked them to write something for a senior recital or some other gig. And so those collaborations kind of are already started. All this program is doing is saying, look, you can set your sights on any composer you want to write for you. Of course, this is all part of a bigger lesson, that is to say, get used to hearing no, but you have to ask, right? Because this is the only way to dream. You have to sort of step out there. So when we, in the course of students choosing who they want to commission, I really just say, look, the world is your oyster. Let's make the first part of this just research, just listen to a ton of new music that's out there. I'm not interested in any particular aesthetic direction. I want the students to choose. I want the students to then negotiate terms of the contract, etc. So the idea is really to just say, look, there are logistical things that you have to think about, but beyond that, you can do whatever you want. It's no different than what goes on in a practice room.
Right.
There are logistical things you got to do. You got to play your scale. You got to get your tongue to line up with your fingers. You got to get the air flowing. You got to do all this. Mm-hmm. What the music is you choose to make, you take off on that one.
Yeah, I agree that in a traditional music program where it is a composition studio, there is already some collaboration happening. Uh-huh. But what you just outlined is the difference, because composers have to put on recitals, and we spend most of our time recruiting our friends to play in the recitals. Mm-hmm. And sometimes performers say, write us a piece. And it's usually just a friendly agreement. But what you're doing is you're formalizing the process so that there is a contract, there's negotiation, right, and then there's a feedback loop, right, until the final product and performance.
Let's face it, even when a friend comes to you and says, sure, I'd love to play your piece on my recital, why don't you write me a new one? That is, you're already negotiating, right?
Yes, you are.
There may or may not be, maybe I'll put it this way. Who's to say what the currency is? Maybe it's a dollar bill, maybe it's a dinner that I've cooked. It's all a good agreement. Maybe it's just a handshake, mm-hmm, and a thank you, and that's fine too. So the terms of the contract they're incredibly flexible. I mean, we all know that. We've written pieces for nothing, and we've written pieces with a great fee. And so it's just a matter of saying, look, you have to think about this.
Yep.
It's an exchange, and once the piece is written, have you thought about it being recorded? Do you care if you write the piece for person A, but person B records it first? I mean, we have to think about all those things as a matter of consideration, as a matter of professionalism. Right? It's what we hope to do in the School of Music, is to nurture an air of professionalism and consideration, because we're a society, right? I mean, we got to operate together and know how to get to a common goal together. So yes, things are formalized in terms of a contract and a negotiation,
yeah,
but they're formalized only in the sense that it's important to me that students know what needs to be considered. Right? It doesn't have to be $1,000 a minute. It doesn't have to be, anything like that. Right?
Right. Yeah, and I think this is great. I think it's a wonderful idea. And it seems like you were identifying a common problem. And were you seeing this as a composer, as a composition professor, or were you viewing it more generally saying we're graduating these students who are unfamiliar with how to bring new music into the world? What was the issue that actually was the impetus behind this?
Right. What problem does this solve? That's a really, really great question, Garrett, and nobody has ever asked me that before. So I think that there are issues on both sides that this addresses that I would like to say I thought of in advance, but I'm not sure I did. The first is, as you've said, when you're a young composer, in order to get your pieces done, you're really just begging people to play your music. So our students have to put on their senior recitals, and it's a very difficult thing to recruit players. And so that seemed like a very one-sided effort. And yet there are those students, those performers, who request pieces to be played for them. So it occurred to me that instead of it being a one-sided thing where composers are always begging performers, why don't we recognize the collaboration that takes place in the creation of any good piece and make it a part of their normal activity, so that they recognize that we all play a role in this. The new music isn't just about the composers. The performer actually plays a huge role. Then if we begin to present it and understand it as a team effort, everybody wins, actually. On the other side, the composers, of course, need to know what to expect when someone does come to them and ask for a piece. So there's something about something important professionally, learning what questions need to be asked. The same sort of thing when, I know you as a teacher, you probably have students ask you, well, what do I have to do to get my piece copyrighted, right? Or do I need a publisher? All those basic things that you've done podcasts about because they're fundamental professional issues. Those are basic questions that are no different than, what do I do when somebody comes to me and asks me for a piece, right? So we want the performer to know what they should think about, and we want the composer to know what they should think about. Beyond that, I have, of course, students who graduate, and they are neither performers nor composers necessarily. Perhaps they're music educators, which is not to say a music educator isn't a performer, but I mean, they're not getting on stage and playing a solo. Perhaps I should say that.
Right.
So many of them are band directors or choir directors or general music teachers. That is, teaching the youngest of the young, in recorder groups or singing folk songs, etc. And there are people around, there are composers around who are very interested in writing for those ensembles as well. And if a band director, no matter how good the band is, no matter how experienced they are, no matter how young they are, there's no question that working directly with the music's creator, that is the composer, is an unbelievable experience for them. And so if a music teacher understands what they can do to bring that experience of creation to their students, to make their students participate in the generation of a new piece, that's golden. I mean, that's something that stays with the kids forever, right?
Yes.
So if our music educators go out and they know, well, I can commission somebody too. It can be, I'm teaching third grade general music. I can go to the band director in the middle school and say, hey, would you write a piece for my recording? So here's a natural partnership, right, that sets students up for their next teacher if they continue music. It builds a relationship between music teachers in sort of feeder programs. It gives the middle school band director a chance to write a new piece. Everybody wins, and the young kids get this experience of being the very first ones to make something happen and interact. It's all, if you go in and see what little kids are doing in their classes often, this is sort of relating to a very different project that I've done. It's not the composition program, but getting little kids writing music on their own. This is really going on a tangent. You may want to edit this out, but if we think about what little kids do when they go into an art class, when they're very small, what do? We give them material. Mm-hmm. And we say, hey, let's mess around with these materials and have fun and feel it in your fingers. Feel the clay, feel the finger paint, feel whatever it is. And it's a very visceral, physical experience And then, of course, this creation goes home and gets hung proudly on the refrigerator, and everybody loves it, and the kid understands what art is. What do we do when we put them in a music class? We have them sing somebody else's music, right?
Yeah.
It's a different, right at the beginning, we're teaching that music actually is not done the same way, right? That you need something really, really special in some way. We don't put Picasso or Rembrandt in front of the kids and say, copy that, right? No. As we do with music, right? So we can train the kids also to play with sound in different ways. And one of the ways that might be done, going away from the project I do in the schools, one of the ways that might be done is simply by exposing them to what a composer does and having them react to a composer's initial ideas through the process of collaboration. I think that this entire project, this commissioning project, the way it can be executed for teachers of small children, all the way through soloists at Carnegie Hall commissioning new work, it feeds everybody.
Yes.
That's why I think it's really important. I think there are many issues being addressed. I won't say problems being solved, but I'll say issues being addressed.
You're speaking my language, Eddie. This episode is sponsored by Dorico, the future of scoring. And we want to feature real Dorico users so you can know that real composers out in the world today are using Dorico to make their careers happen.
My name is Reginald Unterzehr. I am a composer, conductor, voice teacher, musician of a variety of sorts. It does absolutely everything I need. Plus, every time a new feature is released, it does it with depth and clarity that I have never seen in any programs to date. Right now, I think my favorite, I'm just finally figuring out the idea of flows. I'm deep into a multi-movement choral orchestral soloist project. And so there are certain aspects of that I had not explored at all and didn't really need. And now that I see how they work, it's going to be a tremendous help when I get into the rehearsal and distribution of scores phase and revisions phase. It just makes the way that flows are set up makes it a single document that works for all the different movements of it, and I'm loving that. The number one benefit is the fact that I believe this program has legs. That there's going to be updates that come out regularly. The team that runs it is a reliable, solid team. The people who own it are responsible and have a commitment to the musical community. This was my big problem with the platform that I left. It was like, this platform has been abandoned and I do not want to spend another cent on it. I definitely recommend Dorico. My number one thing is that it actually presents a path forward as my work continues. I am 62 years old. Learning a new program is daunting. I really like the way that the scores look. They just seem very natural. The spacings work so much better. The way that choral scores work now, the way that it works with lyrics, the way that it works with layouts. I went back to I was with the choir doing a piece that I had put together in another program 8-10 years ago. And they were asking me all kinds of questions about what is this note and what is that? Is that a tie? Is that a slur? Is that a this thing? I was looking back at it and I was going, oh, yeah, they really fixed that problem, didn't they? Because I don't get those questions with Dorico. People look at the notes and they play the notes or sing the notes and it makes sense. They don't have to figure out what the program meant by it. I run into problems in rehearsals oftentimes when tracking the eye across the page confuses them rhythmically. And I have not had that problem at all with Dorico. Again, it seems to be it gets out of the way of the interface between composers' intentions and musicians' reading. Rather than introducing barriers, it removes barriers, and I like that a lot.
The kind folks at Dorico have set up a special web page so you can go and download a free 30-day trial copy of Dorico. So go and do that. Have been using the program, and I'm absolutely in love with it. Go to dorico.com/TPC. You're speaking my language, Eddie. This is exactly what I believe too, and I think it's absolutely critical. And what I like the most about what you just said in the last few minutes is how you're inspiring these music educators that they are part of the process. And I think people know this, But it was true for me. It was probably true for you and a lot of my peers. But when we were growing up as instrumental students, music was written by somebody far away, we didn't even know if they were alive, right? And most of the time they weren't. And one of my missions as a composer is to engage students and give them those life-changing opportunities and experiences that I got to have. And that doesn't have the expectation of them becoming professional musicians. But man, we can spark a fire that lasts a lifetime.
Yeah. This is so fundamental, right? It's at the root of education, not just the root of arts education and music education, to expose students of any age, to a different way of thinking. That is, so we bring a writer into the room and we make a poem with them, or we make a short story with them, or we each play a word game and connect words in funny ways. Or then we do that and connect it to a visual art and then a sonic art. We're opening up different avenues of thinking, right? And this is basically what education needs to be. It's easy to critique the way education often may fail some students, or students fall through the cracks. That's obviously a larger question about educational policy and how much we ask of our teachers and all of that. But music educators, in my experience, and much of what I'm about to say comes from going into the classroom and not writing for kids, but teaching kids to write. The teachers are the most attentive in the classroom because they can see what it does for their kids when their kids get to play with sound. And so the music educators want to do this. As much, if not more, than the performers and the composers.
Oh, yeah. Every music educator I know would agree with that, 100%.
Yeah.
As you've built this program, Eddie, what have been some of the surprising lessons that you didn't anticipate being part of the journey?
Well, I think the biggest surprise for me has been that it took me about a year to kind of quietly work it out on my own, how it logistically would function. And when I brought it to some people here at East Carolina University, the big surprise was that they said, "Oh, that's a great idea. How about if we give you some money?"
They actually said that?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Wow.
Yes, exactly. See, your surprise, that was my surprise. Exactly. And that's where this distinguished professorship comes in, because it was basically awarded to me to support this idea.
Oh, okay.
So it comes with some funds that have enabled me to get it off the ground. And the next surprise was more support. That is, some members of the community who came forward and they said the same thing. They said, "Well, this is really great. How can I help?" And I said, "Well, we have a multi-year program for researching the composers and negotiating the contract and then collaborating in the second year and then performing the recording. And so it's a 3-year process and it starts anew every year. Maybe you would like to fund one cycle, one 3-year cycle or multi-year cycle." And they said, "Oh, yeah, that'd be great."
Oh, wow.
The surprise to me was that it is a good idea and that I actually don't have to sell it. I'm a horrible fundraiser, but this is an idea that doesn't have to be sold. I mean, it just has to be explained. I think finally I had a good idea, an idea that was good enough that people came forward and they said, yeah, we'll support this. So that it hasn't been as difficult as I thought it would be. And that has been really great. I thought it was coming while I was developing it.
It seems like you not only recognized that this was a problem, but as you presented it to your colleagues and to the community, they also saw the opportunity here. And that's why you didn't have to sell it, I think, because everyone saw the enrichment opportunities for everyone involved, and it wasn't just bolstering any particular program or study group. You know what I mean? It was a vertical benefit, so to speak.
Yeah, several people have mentioned that, so I think you're right. It isn't about the composers. It isn't about the performers. It isn't about the conductors. In truth, it's about whoever wants to participate. And that extends beyond the students, also to the faculty. So, for instance, we have now identified our fourth composer to be commissioned, and I'll announce him in a week or so. And our next phase will be negotiating what he wants to write for. And before I begin that negotiation, I'm going to make the rounds of my colleagues here and say, hey, this is the person we're going to commission. If he wrote for an ensemble, of singers, then would you, the choral conductor, be interested? Or if he writes for the orchestra, would you be interested? Or if he writes for a string quartet, would you be interested in coaching? Or, whatever the case may be. So I'll sort of go around and I'll ask all the faculty, are you interested? I don't know what this composer wants to do, but whatever they want to do, I would like to give them the option that our faculty and students are interested in. And generally speaking, or at least the last 3 years, every faculty member has said, well, yeah, sure, I'd love to do something. And then that opens everything up, and our students they know there are no bounds, because it's not as though the choir director said no.
Ah, right. So this brings up an important point that I didn't understand before.
Yeah.
It's not like you have the NewMusic Initiative, which is a concert series, you said,
yeah.
But it's not like you have an in-house new music ensemble that is commissioning. This is a school-wide endeavor.
It is absolutely a school-wide endeavor. And part of the negotiation is, we will have Skype conversations with the composer I'll probably have the first one in about 3 weeks, where, again, any student or faculty who want to show up to this meeting, and the composer will be on the screen, and we'll begin to talk about what does the composer want to write for.
That's great.
And the students will respond. If they're conductors, they'll respond. And it could be anything. So it's really we have all these resources here. We have an orchestra, we have a wind ensemble, we have a concert band, we have great string program, we have great voice programs, and, great percussion ensemble, all these, great little niches. If they want to write a string quartet, they could. We'd like to involve more students than that, but, if they really want to, then that's fine. We have a piano concerto that is being finished right now, written by Matthew Ricketts. Mindy Wagner is now collaborating with us. She's working on a piece for a couple of voices and a couple of instruments. And Jim Mobley, we've already finished his cycle. We wrote a sinfonietta for, 20-odd players. 20 players, we've got a full orchestra and piano concerto, and Mindy's writing for about 10. So it could be really anything. And that's all part of it, right? It's part of what you negotiate when you get a commission. What are you going to write for?
Right. So I'm interested in how this program can be replicated at other schools. So if there is another university professor who's listening, or if there's a student who wants to present this to their faculty who's listening, what can they do? What are the steps that need to happen to make this program occur in other places?
Okay, that's a great question. I have to say right from the beginning that one of the things that I think is so important about this commissioning program is that it is replicable, it is adaptable, and I truly believe it can be done at any school. It's all a question of scale, right? It's all a question of resources, fundamentally. So I think the way it begins is, first of all, to just understand this particular model. Of course, the model can and should be adapted, but an easy way to find the model is perhaps to watch that brief video that you saw, and you can find that at ecu.edu/newmusic, and you'll see a video, a number of videos.
And I'll provide a link for that in the show notes too. So
okay, great, thank you for that. So that is one model, I'll say, for how to execute it. I think all that needs to happen is that someone needs to get a few students who are interested, and really it can be a few. It could just be a half dozen students. It could be 100, but it could be 6, to talk about what they might like to commission if they could. In other words, to just brainstorm, to listen to a lot of music, and you can have the students listen to anything, absolutely anything. Composers living, composers no longer living, composers only living in your state, composers only living in your town, right? You can have the students reach out to composers living within 100 miles. It turns into a little tiny research project, right? One element of this that I really like is that this initial step of identifying a composer to commission. At this point, we have a list of, a couple hundred composers that students begin to listen to. So the first step is already a major achievement as far as I'm concerned. The students are listening to a lot of music they never heard before. Mm-hmm. Regardless of whether they want to participate in this commission, they're listening to a lot of new music, and I think that's great. So you talk to your students, see what they're interested in, and say, okay, maybe my piano studio will commission a piece. So you listen to some composers who are out there, do some YouTube searches or some other searches. This great database now that Rob Deemer just did of female composers, he's got 3,000 composers or something like that. Have you seen this? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I have. It's great. It's fantastic.
It's amazing.
Yeah, Alex Shapiro and Martha Mook have also put together a second resource. It's a single website where all these different databases can be accessed in one place.
That's amazing. So you send your students to the database and say, okay, everybody choose 10 composers and listen to one piece by each one, or choose, however you want to make an assignment. So that could work into, if we're talking about a piano studio, a little repertoire exposure and some presentations, right? So that they could be bringing this music in. And then you write a note and say, would you be willing to write us a piece, a 5-minute etude for our studio? And it could be for one piano or two pianos or piano for hands or, whatever you as a teacher in a studio want to do. And the trick, I shouldn't say that. The real crux of it, though, isn't just in the commission. It's in explaining to a composer, this isn't a regular commission. We want the collaboration to be a part of this whole thing. We don't want to just see some sketches, but we want to work with you. You can maybe visit us, or we can have a Skype visit, and we want to be able to react to you and to teach our students how to engage a composer. It's not about our students having final say-so over every note. It's about our students learning how to interact with the composer.
Right.
So the collaboration is a really vital part of the process. And again, it's not about, the students having a final say-so. Like any commission, you take a certain amount of risk. And allowing the process, once a composer is selected, and beginning to talk to the students about what a commission involves, and then the collaborative process, and allowing it all to take enough time. Often, you simply have to realize that composers are busy, so maybe the entire process takes 2 years. Maybe it takes longer. Maybe it takes shorter if you have a composer who's willing to, they have a little hole in their schedule and they're willing to pound out a 3 or 4 minute piece kind of thing. But you want to allow the interaction and the anticipation and the exploration of what is necessary in organizing a commission. As far as the curriculum, if you will, for negotiating, I still use as a starting point that old Meet the Composer commissioning thing.
Yeah, that's a great resource, actually.
Yeah, and almost everything that they really need to know as far as what goes into commission is on a single page. I think it's on, page 2 or page 3, and it's all listed there. These are the things you need to consider. And the basic idea that a contract is simply an agreement, whatever you agree to. You may write me this etude for, large Domino's pizza, or you may do it for $1,000. It's all good. So once you go through the research and selecting somebody, and then negotiating the contract, and you can use the Meet the Composer's guidelines, commissioning guidelines, and then finding an agreement with the composer who's willing to collaborate with the students in the sense of teaching students how to work with the composer, that's it, right? There's just not that much to it. You listen and choose a composer, you use Meet the Composer guidelines, and you collaborate. And beyond that, it's normal. The piece gets delivered, and you rehearse it.
And how do you get the institutional support so this can become an ongoing thing?
Right. Well, this is the hard part, right? I think in my particular case, when I came up with this program and I mentioned it to somebody, as I said, I was very lucky in that people were very supportive and some funding support came through very quickly. My plan right in the beginning was simply to explain this idea, and then based on whatever support I could garner, I would scale the project accordingly, right? So, of course, I sold it initially as a project that could commission any piece, right? We could commission an opera, because that way I could show a huge price tag and give people room to help me or help me in a more modest level. But I was fully willing to go to the piano studio here and say, how about we start it with you, right? In which case you can work with alumni, right? Let's imagine that we started with, the piano studio, the trumpet studio, or the woodwind studio, string studio, whichever studio you wish. You can raise a little bit of money from alumni, from faculty, from other Department of Music or School of Music supporters, small donations, $10, $20, $50 donations, they pile up really fast, and it becomes the X School of Music Piano Studio annual commission, right? It becomes something the alumni, in our case, let's say the ECU Alumni Piano Studio Commission, and we do one every year, and it costs nothing but $500, right, or $1,000. So it can be done very modestly, and if you attribute it to something, to let's say the alumni, the piano alumni, or the North Carolina band directors alumni, then it becomes very quickly a tradition, right? All you got to do is do it once. And then the second time you do it, it's the second annual.
Right.
Right? So it's a tradition. And people want to jump on. They were like, yes, we're doing an annual commission.
Yeah.
Right? And it's small, right? It can really be done in a very small way in terms of small contributions, grassroots contributions. The one sticking point that I have found, and I would really love to find a way around this. My particular institution hasn't yet worked out the details, but I would love to be able to do this through one or more of the many crowdfunding possibilities.
Yeah, but because you're a nonprofit state school, it just gets really complicated.
Yeah, more than complicated, actually. It appears as though it's just not legal.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, you can't raise funds for a state institution through a crowdsourcing in that way.
Yeah.
But I think there are other ways to do it. It took a little while, but I was able to get I think many in the university were working on this. I was just one of many, able to get a quick donate here button on our webpage, right? So that, I have to get them away from Kickstarter. I have to get them over to our page. But once they get to our page, they can donate pretty easily.
Yeah. Well, if you could get an alumni group to form a non-school sponsored organization that could get nonprofit status, then that is an outside entity that would do the fundraising and then commission the piece for the students.
Right. Well, that's right. Absolutely right. In fact, many schools or departments, such as ours, just give me another idea now, we have organization that raises money for student scholarships. And they're called the Friends of the School of Music.
Yeah, and most schools have Friends of Opera and whatever. Yep.
Right, exactly. And there you go. That's an independent organization that could be used for this purpose, or they could set up a separate fund for this purpose. I've been doing the larger project, this NewMusic Initiative now this is the 18th year, and I know that while I have some generous supporters, really the bulk, 90% of my budget comes from donations of $100 or less.
Yeah. So
I know this is the way it happens. We're not, our repertoire isn't always the easiest sell.
Well, that and your alumni are music educators.
That's right.
It's not like you're the school of business.
That's right. So I don't even bother asking people for large large, well, I shouldn't say I don't ask, but, I'm really, really delighted to get a $50 donation. To me, a $100 donation is huge, especially from a recent alum. I mean, that's a good chunk of rent.
Yep.
It's an enormous endorsement of what we're doing.
Right.
But I do believe that this is replicable. It's just a matter of scale. If larger Midwestern universities that have tremendous resources, they might do this really for a major opera over probably not a 3-year period, but maybe a 4 or 5-year period. But at the same time, I know I taught before I came here. I taught at a tiny liberal arts school in Indiana, and we could have done it with, much more modest resources in terms of instrumentation and also funding. But I believe it's a vital part of the way we train our students to enter the world and understand how arts come about and the role they can play in that.
Yeah. Is there anything that you've always wanted to talk about regarding this program, but no one ever seems to ask you?
What a great question. You know what? There was a point when I make a big point around here, around the School of Music, of clarifying that the students choose who will be commissioned. Now, we have meetings. I run a lot of the meetings to get them listening and asking questions and talking, just thinking about the music. I've now begun to have my colleagues, the conductor, some of the applied faculty come in and do those meetings so that other students will come in and attend when their professor runs the meeting, get more students involved and get other perspectives, etc. And it's been important to me that everybody understands that it's not about what I want. Yes, I created this program and I run it and I make it happen, but it's not about my selection. And I think nobody has ever asked me, who would I want to commission? Which I found very interesting.
Huh. Before I actually ask you that question, Eddie, I just want to point out how much I love that this is student-driven, because now it comes from the bottom up and it builds motivation, it builds that quality that all musicians need to have, that fire of wanting to do it, rather than being a top-down
direct. That's the point, right? I mean, I could not have said it any better. I mean, that's exactly the point. And that if the program has any value, that is the value, I think.
So if you could commission anyone in the world, who would you want to commission and for what ensemble?
Yeah, so I said, nobody ever asked me that. And of course, I knew you were going to ask me. But really, the answer I have is sort of every year we have, listened to a ton of music. And I am often discovering composers whose music I didn't really know. Maybe I've heard the name, but I hadn't really listened to much of the music. And one thing that I have learned is there's a ton of composers I would really love to commission. There's a lot of people doing really, really fascinating stuff to me. And I don't know about you, but to me, the stuff that's really fascinating is the stuff that sounds amazing. And I just never would have thought to do that. It's really great, but it sounds perfect. But I don't know how they thought of that. I just wouldn't have done that. And every year, honest to goodness, every year, the composer the students chose is the composer that I would have chosen. It's fascinating. And the composer, of course, the students, I have them narrow down the big list.
Yeah.
The last month, we're usually down to about 10 composers. In the last 2 weeks, or last week of the semester, we're down to about 4 or 5 composers. And then I send a SurveyMonkey survey out to the entire School of Music, and I say, hey, listen to these composers and rank them, 1 to 4. Because obviously, if I call you, Garrett, and I say, are you interested? And you say, well, I'm really swamped, I can't do it. I better have somebody in the number 2 slot, right? So I need a few composers. But every time, the top 3 or 4 composers, they're all great. And I would be thrilled to have any one of them here. Just so happens that every time, the first composer has said yes. So it's been really great. So I don't really not answer it. Nobody ever asked me who I would get. But in fact, I would get the same people the students are choosing. It's really great. I never would have thought that, our
That's brilliant.
We're now collaborating with Mindy Wagner. This program is just 3 years off the ground, and now we're engaging a Pulitzer Prize winner. I mean, I'm thrilled. And Matthew Rickett's piano concerto, he just sent today. I got the first 10 minutes of the score, and just sitting down at the piano and reading it. It's gorgeous. It makes me weep. It's just fabulous music. And Jim's piece, I don't know if you heard the piece that Jim did. There's a score and a recording up on the site. It's a brilliant piece. It's just joyous, to sort of have the students make these choices and then see them follow through in making the music happen and making it their own. So my answer is nobody's ever asked, but they don't have to, because it's all, the answer is happening already.
Oh, I'll let you get by on that one then, I guess.
Okay, thanks.
Well, Eddie, this has been a really great conversation for me. I think it's a wonderful initiative you've got going, and I love how, like you pointed out, it is replicable. You just have to get that interest going with the students, and there are ways to fund it. It's not impossible, but like we all know as composers, it doesn't have to all be about the money. There are other things that you can negotiate.
That's right. That's right. And I think those are significant things.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. When a new composer moves into a community, making personal connections is every bit as important as, making rent.
Well,
for instance.
That and multiple performances, having a great recording.
Yep.
I mean, the list goes on and on.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I think because we have been speaking for quite a while, we'll just...
Yeah, I go on and on. I'm sorry about that. Yeah.
We'll just call this a day and put a dot on it. And I appreciate your time so much, and I appreciate what you're doing and for allowing me to learn more about it today.
Thank you, Garrett, for having me and for exploring this and bringing this to people's attention. I really hope lots of people take it and run with it. Thank you for everything you're doing with your program.
Oh, thank you. This episode of The Portfolio Composer has been supported by Dorico, the new professional music notation and composition software from Steinberg. Dorico has been designed from the ground up to be a flexible and powerful tool. Whether you're a composer or arranger, a teacher or student, working in music engraving and publishing, or working in producing music for media such as film, TV, and games. Compared to other scoring programs, Dorico is fast, fluid, and efficient. Designed for comfortable use on a laptop on the go, but seamlessly scaling up to working on multiple large displays in the studio. It has a beautiful, modern, and uncluttered user interface that allows you to focus on your music. Dorico also embraces the traditions of the finest printed music and produces pages of such balance and proportion by default, you'll be amazed. You can bring music into Dorico from your existing software using Music XML or MIDI, and you can try Dorico out completely free of charge for 30 days by downloading a trial version from dorico.com/TPC. Try it today and experience the future of scoring for yourself.